A badge gleamed in the afternoon sun as Officer Brent Lasker's hand closed around 76-year-old Evelyn Carter's wallet. "Nobody's gonna believe you, old woman," he sneered, pocketing her last $600. But as Evelyn watched him drive away, she whispered a prayer, not to God, but to her son. The son Lasker didn't know existed. The son America called Echo 1. The deadliest operative to ever serve in shadows. Keep watching to see how one racist cop's greed unleashed a reckoning he never saw coming. And comment your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. The August heat pressed down on Millhaven's streets like a weight, making the asphalt shimmer with false promises of water. Evelyn Carter moved slowly along Birch Avenue, her cane tapping a steady rhythm against the cracked sidewalk. At 76, she'd learned to navigate these streets with the careful precision of someone who understood that one wrong step could mean disaster, not from the uneven pavement, but from the men who patrolled it. Her purse hung close to her side, the worn leather strap wrapped twice around her wrist. Inside was everything that mattered for the next 30 days, $600 in cash. Her Social Security check cashed that morning at the corner store because the banks had long since fled this part of town. Medicine money. Food money. Survival money. The cruiser appeared in her peripheral vision, first sliding alongside her like a shark tracking prey. Evelyn kept walking, eyes forward, breathing steady. Maybe he'd pass. Maybe today wouldn't be the day. The siren chirped, once sharp aggressive. A command, not a request. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there." Officer Brent Lasker stepped out of his vehicle with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never faced consequences. 6 feet of muscle gone slightly soft around the middle, blonde hair, cropped military short beneath his cap. His hand rested on his service weapon, not drawing it, just reminding her it was there. "Good afternoon, officer," Evelyn said, her voice carefully neutral. She'd learned long ago that dignity could be mistaken for defiance, and defiance was dangerous. "Where you coming from?" Lasker circled her slowly, his boots heavy on the pavement. "The corner store. Just cashed my check." His eyes lit up at that, a predator catching scent. "That right? You know there's been reports of drug activity in that area." "I wouldn't know anything about that, sir. I just needed my money for the month." "Your money?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the stale coffee on his breath, see the small scar above his left eyebrow. "See, that's interesting. Because someone matching your description was seen making suspicious exchanges." Evelyn's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm 76 years old, officer. I was getting my Social Security." "Age doesn't mean innocence." His hand moved to her purse. "I'm going to need to search that bag." "Officer, please." "Are you resisting?" The words came out sharp, practiced. A script he'd perfected over years of taking what wasn't his. "Because that would be a serious problem, ma'am. Resisting a lawful order, that's an arrestable offense. And at your age, well..." He let the threat hang in the air like humidity. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she handed over her purse. She watched him rifle through it, watched his fingers find the envelope with her cash, watched him count it with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. $600 cash. He whistled low. "That's a lot of money to be carrying around. Suspicious amount, really." "It's my Social Security. I have the receipt from cashing it." "Could be drug money." "Probably is." He pocketed the entire envelope smooth as silk. "I'll need to take this as evidence." "Officer Lasker." She saw his name badge clearly now, memorizing it. "Please, that's all I have for the month. My medicine, my food." Should have thought about that before getting involved in illegal activities. He tossed her purse back at her empty, now except for tissues and hard candies. "You want to file a complaint?" "Go ahead. Walk your old ass down to the station. Tell them Officer Brent Lasker took your drug money. See how far that gets you." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more violent than a shout. "Nobody's gonna believe you, old woman. It's your word against mine, and I've got the badge. You're nothing, less than nothing. Just another old black woman crying wolf. Evelyn stood there, her empty purse clutched against her chest, watching him get back in his cruiser. He took his time adjusting his mirror, sipping from a water bottle, making her stand there in the heat, knowing she was powerless. Finally, the engine started, and he pulled away, slow windows down, one hand hanging out casual as a Sunday drive. She waited until the cruiser turned the corner before allowing herself to sink onto the bus stop bench. Her hands shook now, not from fear, but from rage, the kind that had been building for 76 years, the kind that had no safe outlet, the kind that could kill you if you let it. "You all right, Mrs. Carter?" She looked up to find Damon, the teenager from 2 houses down, hovering nearby with concern written across his face. "I'm fine, baby." The lie came automatic. What else could she say? That she'd just been robbed by the very people meant to protect her. That her entire month's survival had been stolen in broad daylight. "You need help getting home." "No, I can manage." But managing and surviving were different things. As she made her way back to her apartment, each step felt heavier than the last. $600. Her blood pressure medication cost $160. Groceries for a month if she was careful, maybe $200. Utilities were overdue by $80. The math kept spinning in her head, numbers that wouldn't add up no matter how she arranged them. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator had been broken for 3 years, and the stairs seemed steeper every day. She paused at each landing not just to catch her breath, but to gather her strength for what came next. Inside her small 1-bedroom, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Neat, clean, dignified in its poverty. Pictures covered every surface: her late husband James in his army uniform, her daughter Patricia, who died too young from cancer, and Marcus. She picked up his photo, the most recent one she had. It was 5 years old, taken at his consulting firm's Christmas party. He stood in a dark suit, smiling that careful smile he'd perfected, the one that revealed nothing. To anyone else, he looked like a successful businessman. Handsome in that understated way, lean and tall like his father had been, with eyes that seemed to take in everything while giving away nothing. But a mother knew things. A mother noticed the way he held himself coiled and ready, even in repose. The way his eyes tracked every exit in a room. The way he could disappear from a conversation without anyone noticing until he was gone. He called himself a security consultant now. Before that, it had been government contractor. Before that, military service that he never elaborated on. She'd stopped asking questions years ago, understanding that his silence was its own kind of love, protecting her from truths that might destroy her sleep forever. She hadn't spoken to him in 6 months. Not because they were estranged, but because that's how it worked. He would call when he could from numbers that never worked when she tried them back. He would visit without warning, appearing at her door at strange hours with groceries and cash, staying just long enough to make sure she was okay before vanishing again. "Don't write me letters," he'd told her once years ago. "If you ever really need me, Mom, then write. But understand that if you do, things will happen that can't be undone." She'd never understood what he meant, not fully. But sitting at her small kitchen table, looking at the bills that would go unpaid, thinking about the medication she wouldn't be able to afford, remembering Lasker's sneer and the weight of his contempt, she finally understood. Some things couldn't be undone. Some things shouldn't be. She pulled out a sheet of paper, her good stationery that she saved for important occasions. Her handwriting had gotten shakier over the years, but she took her time making each word clear. "My dear Marcus, I hope this letter finds you well wherever you are. I've tried to be strong. I've tried to handle things on my own the way you asked me to. But something happened today that I can't handle alone. A police officer named Brent Lasker robbed me. Took my entire Social Security check, $600, claimed it was drug money. He told me no one would believe me. He was probably right. I don't know what you do, son. I've never asked because I understood that not knowing was safer for both of us. But I know you're not really a security consultant. A mother knows things. And right now I need my son. Not for the money I'll manage somehow, but because I can't live in a world where men like Lasker can do this without consequence. Not anymore. I'm too old and too tired to be afraid anymore. I love you always. Mom? She sealed the letter in an envelope and addressed it to a P.O. box in Virginia, the only address he'd ever given her for emergencies. Then she walked back down those 3 flights of stairs, each step an act of revolution, and mailed it at the corner box. Walking back, she passed the spot where Lasker had robbed her. The sun was setting now, painting the sky the color of an old bruise. Somewhere out there her son was doing whatever shadows he moved through. And soon, very soon, he would read her letter. Evelyn Carter had lived through Jim Crow, through the civil rights movement, through decades of progress and regression. She'd buried a husband and a daughter. She'd survived things that should have broken her. But today, for the first time in her 76 years, she'd done something more than survive. She'd unleashed something. She just didn't know what yet. 3,000 miles away, in a facility that didn't exist on any official documents, Marcus Carter stood in a room that was equal parts office and armory. The walls were lined with monitors, displaying feeds from around the globe, situations, developing assets in motion, threats being assessed and eliminated. He went by Echo 1 here, though even that was need to know. 6 feet 2 inches of lethal precision wrapped in understated presentation. To look at him, you might think military, but you'd be only partially right. What Marcus had become transcended traditional service. He was a scalpel in a world of hammers, sent when the situation required surgery instead of amputation. "Package for you," Thompson said, entering with an envelope. Thompson was new, still had that eager shine of someone who thought this job was about patriotism and honor. He'd learn or he'd wash out. Most did one or the other within a year. Marcus took the envelope without looking up from the satellite feed he was studying, a compound in Eastern Europe that would be rubble by tomorrow if he did his job right. But his hand stilled as he recognized the handwriting. His mother's handwriting. In 5 years of operations through 43 missions across 6 continents, Marcus Carter had never hesitated, never flinched, never felt his heart rate spike from anything other than necessary adrenaline. But now, holding this simple white envelope, his hands trembled imperceptibly. "Don't write me letters. If you ever really need me, Mom, then write." He'd told her that, hoping the day would never come, knowing it might, dreading what it would mean if it did. He opened the letter with the same precision he used to disarm explosives. Read it once quickly, gathering intelligence. Read it again slowly, feeling each word like a blade between his ribs. "A police officer named Brent Lasker robbed me." The monitors around him continued their silent surveillance of global threats. Wars being planned, terrorists being tracked, governments being toppled or propped up, depending on American interests. All of it suddenly seemed very far away. He told me no one would believe me. He was probably right. Marcus set the letter down carefully, his movements deliberate and controlled. Someone watching might think he was calm. But Thompson, still standing in the doorway, took an unconscious step back. Something in the air had changed, like the pressure drop before a storm. "I need a leave of absence," Marcus said, his voice flat and professional. "Echo 1, you're scheduled for deployment in 48 hours. "I know." He turned to face Thompson fully, and the younger man understood then what others learned too late. Echo 1 wasn't just another operative. He was something else, something that made even hardened killers nervous. "Family emergency. Sir, protocol states." "Protocol." Marcus smiled then, and it was the kind of smile that made smart people remember urgent business elsewhere. "Tell me, Thompson, what do you know about protocol?" It's what maintains order, sir. Keeps us operational." "Wrong. Protocol is what we follow when the world makes sense, when the system works." He picked up his mother's letter again, folded it precisely, placed it in his pocket. "Sometimes the system breaks. Sometimes protocol becomes complicity." He moved to his equipment locker, beginning the process of selecting what he'd need. Nothing traceable to the agency. Nothing that would create international incidents. Just the tools of a trade he'd perfected over years of making problems disappear. "Sir, I have to report this. You know I do." Marcus paused, considering. Thompson was right, of course. He would report it. The handlers would be notified. Contingencies would be activated. But by then, Marcus would be gone. "Tell them Echo 1 had a family emergency," he said finally. "Tell them I'll be back in 72 hours. Tell them whatever you need to tell them to sleep at night." He closed the locker, turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway, where Thompson still stood, conflicted between duty and the very real understanding that getting in Echo 1's way might be the last mistake he ever made. "Thompson," Marcus said quietly, "you ever had someone take something from your mother?" "No, sir." "Pray you never do, because protocol won't mean a damn thing if it happens." And then he was gone, moving through the facility's corridors with purpose. Others stepped aside without being asked, something in his bearing warning them off. He wasn't Echo 1 anymore, not really. He was something more primal, more dangerous. He was a son. And Officer Brent Lasker had no idea what was coming. The flight from Virginia to Georgia took 3 hours. Marcus spent them constructing and discarding plans, his mind running through scenarios with the same precision he used to plan extractions from hostile territory. But this was different. This wasn't about eliminating a target or acquiring intelligence. This was about something harder: justice in a system designed to prevent it. He could kill Lasker. The thought came unbidden, simple as breathing. Make it look like an accident, or a robbery gone wrong, or simply make him disappear entirely. Marcus knew 47 ways to kill a man without leaving evidence, had used most of them at one point or another in service to his country. But his mother wouldn't want that. Not really. She wanted consequences, not revenge. She wanted the world to see what Lasker was to know, that even someone like her, old black, forgotten by society, mattered. That was harder than killing. That required finesse. He rented a car at the airport using one of his clean identities, paying cash, keeping his face away from cameras with practiced ease. The drive to Millhaven took another 2 hours, time he used to acclimate himself to being back in Georgia. The air was different here, heavy with humidity and history. Every mile closer to his hometown felt like moving backward through time to a version of himself he'd thought was dead. Millhaven hadn't changed much in the 5 years since his last visit. Still dying the slow death of all small southern towns, the young fleeing to cities, the old hanging on through stubbornness and nowhere else to go. Main Street's storefronts were half-empty windows, either boarded up or displaying the same faded merchandise from a decade ago. He didn't go to his mother's apartment. Not yet. First, he needed intelligence. The Millhaven Police Department was a squat brick building that looked like it had been designed by someone who confused intimidation with architecture. Marcus parked across the street in the shadow of a defunct hardware store and watched. Shift change was at 4. Lasker emerged at 4:15, laughing with 2 other officers, his body language relaxed and confident. Why wouldn't he be confident? He'd been doing this for years, probably. Taking what he wanted from people who couldn't fight back. The perfect predator in a system that protected him. Marcus followed him from a distance as Lasker got into his personal vehicle, a lifted pickup truck with aftermarket modifications that screamed compensation. The route was predictable: stop at a liquor store for a 6-pack drive-through, at a fast food joint, then home to a small house on the white side of town where the lawns were green and the police response times were measured in minutes instead of hours. A woman met him at the door, wife or girlfriend, blonde and tired-looking, with the particular exhaustion of someone who'd given up fighting years ago. 2 kids visible through the window, maybe 8 and 10, doing homework at a kitchen table. A family man. That complicated things and simplified them simultaneously. Marcus drove back to the black part of town as the sun set, noting the differences that were both subtle and stark. Fewer streetlights, more potholes. Bars on windows, not for decoration, but for survival. This was where his mother lived, where Lasker hunted, where justice went to die. He finally went to her building at 8 p.m., climbing those 3 flights of stairs she'd mentioned in her letter. Each step felt heavier than mountains he'd climbed in Afghanistan, each landing a reminder of what she faced every day. She answered on the second knock, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. She was smaller than he remembered, or maybe he'd just forgotten how large the world could make you feel. Her eyes, though her eyes were the same. Sharp, intelligent seeing through whatever facade he wore. "Marcus," she said simply, and stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was exactly as he remembered, everything in its place, dignity maintained through order when chaos pressed from all sides. He saw the bills on the kitchen table, saw the empty medication bottles, understood the mathematics of poverty she'd been calculating. "You look thin," she said, because mothers said things like that even when their sons were weapons shaped like men. "You look beautiful," he replied, because sons said things like that when words were insufficient for the love they felt. She made him tea, the same brand she'd been drinking for 40 years, probably the same box from his last visit. They sat at her small table, and he listened as she told him everything, not just about Lasker, but about the pattern, the other officers who did the same, the fear that kept people silent, the system that made it all possible. "I didn't call you here to kill him," she said quietly, reading his thoughts with the precision of someone who'd raised him. "I know what you are, son. Maybe not the details, but I know. And that's not what I want." "What do you want, Mom?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea like it might hold answers. "I want him to feel what we feel. The powerlessness. The fear. I want him to know that there are consequences even for men like him." Marcus nodded slowly. "And the money. It's not about the money. It never was." She looked up at him then, and he saw decades of accumulated rage refined into purpose. "It's about making sure he never does this again. To anyone." He reached across the table, took her weathered hands in his. Her fingers were so small, so fragile. But there was strength there too, the kind that endured rather than destroyed. "I need 3 days," he said. "Can you give me 3 days? I've survived 76 years. I can survive 3 more days." He stood to leave, but she caught his arm. "Marcus, promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't become him while trying to stop him." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but he made it anyway. Because sometimes lies told to mothers were their own kind of love. Outside her apartment in the dimly lit hallway that smelled of old cooking and older dreams, Marcus Carter shed the last vestiges of Echo 1. He wasn't an operative now. He wasn't an asset or a weapon or a tool of governmental policy. He was a son whose mother had been wronged, and Officer Brent Lasker was about to learn what that meant. The thing about surveillance was that most people thought it required sophisticated equipment, satellites, drones, technological omniscience. But Marcus had learned in places where electricity was a luxury that the best surveillance was human, patient, and invisible. He became invisible. For 3 days he watched Lasker. Not constantly, that would be noticed, but enough to understand the patterns, the weaknesses, the leverage points. Every person had them, the soft spots where pressure applied correctly could crack them open like eggs. Lasker started his mornings at 6, always the same routine. Coffee at home, black 2 cups while scrolling through his phone. Kiss the wife, perfunctory habitual. Ruffle the kid's hair on his way out. Drive to work, taking the same route, stopping at the same gas station every Tuesday and Friday to buy lottery tickets he never won. His shift ran 8 to 4 officially, but Marcus noted he often extended it not from dedication but from opportunity. The hours after school let out, but before parents got home from work, when teenagers could be caught with small amounts of marijuana that could be confiscated along with whatever cash they carried. The early morning hours, when people heading to work could be stopped for broken taillights that weren't broken until Lasker's baton made them so. But it was Lasker's off-duty activities that provided the real intelligence. Thursday nights were poker games in the back room of Paulson's bar, where badges bet money they shouldn't have, and discussed things that would end careers if recorded, which Marcus did, using equipment that looked like nothing more than a forgotten phone charger plugged into an outlet. Friday afternoons were his weakness, a woman who wasn't his wife, in an apartment complex on the edge of town. Young desperate, probably trading whatever she had to avoid charges that Lasker could make appear or disappear at will. Saturday mornings were youth football practice, where Lasker assistant coached his son's team, yelling at children with the same casual cruelty he showed everyone else. But Sunday was when the real Brent Lasker emerged. Church at First Baptist, sitting in the third pew with his family singing hymns about justice and mercy, with a voice that had never meant either. Shaking hands afterward, smiling that practiced smile of a man who'd compartmentalized his sins so effectively he might actually believe his own performance. It was after that Sunday service, as Lasker glad-handed his way through the congregation, that Marcus made his first move. Not against Lasker directly, that would come later, but against the foundation of his confidence, the thing that let him sleep at night. Marcus had noticed the church's security was minimal. Why would it need more? This was Millhaven, where crime happened on the other side of town. It was simple enough to access the church office to find the donation records, to discover that Officer Brent Lasker had been skimming from the collection plate he helped count every Sunday. Small amounts, never enough to trigger an audit, but consistent over years. 500 here, 300 there. Always cash, always untraceable, except for the fact that Lasker's reported income didn't match his spending, and the church's deposits didn't match their collections. Marcus didn't expose it. Not yet. He simply documented it, photographed the evidence, created a file that would destroy not just Lasker's career, but his carefully constructed image. Then he moved on to the next phase. Monday morning, Lasker woke to find his truck wouldn't start. Nothing suspicious, vehicles broke down all the time. He called for a ride from his partner, Officer Tom Brennan, grumbling about repair costs he couldn't afford. What he didn't know was that Marcus had spent an hour under that truck at 3 a.m. not damaging it, but installing something, a GPS tracker. Yes, but more importantly, a listening device that would capture every conversation, every confession, every casual admission of crimes that men like Lasker never imagined would see daylight. Tuesday, the poker game went differently. Lasker lost not dramatically, but consistently. His cards were bad. His bluffs were called. His tells were obvious. By the end of the night, he owed $3,000 to men who didn't accept IOUs kindly. Marcus, playing at this table under an identity so clean it would take federal resources to crack, had insured those losses with the kind of card manipulation that looked like bad luck rather than enemy action. "Rough night, officer," Marcus said, as Lasker stumbled out drunk and angry and broker than he'd been that morning. "Fuck off," Lasker muttered, not even looking at the man who'd just dismantled his evening. Wednesday was when the fear started. Lasker arrived at his girlfriend's apartment to find the door already open. Nothing disturbed, nothing taken, just open. A message that someone knew someone had been there. Someone could get to her whenever they wanted. She was terrified, of course. Wanted to call the police. But what could Lasker say? That someone had broken into the apartment where he was cheating on his wife. That his mistress needed protection. He told her it was probably just kids. Probably nothing. But she saw the fear in his eyes and recognized it for what it was. The look of a predator realizing it might be prey. Thursday morning, his wife received a package. No return address, no postmark, hand-delivered, while Lasker was at work. Inside were photographs, not of his affair, that would be too simple. These were pictures of him at work, taking money from people, planting evidence. Every crime captured in high-definition timestamps, visible locations clear. But here was the genius of it. The photos were printed on dissolving paper, the kind used by intelligence agencies for sensitive documents. By the time Lasker got home, racing after his wife's hysterical call, they were nothing but pulp and memory. "Someone's trying to destroy me," he told her, holding her as she sobbed. "Someone's lying about me. But she'd seen the truth in those images, recognized the man she'd been avoiding acknowledging for years. The damage was done, even if the evidence was gone. Friday was when Lasker started to crack. He arrived at work to find internal affairs waiting. Someone had called in an anonymous tip about missing evidence from the lockup. Not enough to arrest him, but enough to start an investigation. Enough to make his fellow officers step back, create distance, suddenly remember urgent business when he entered a room. "This is bullshit," he told Brennan, his partner of 6 years. "Someone's setting me up." Brennan, who'd participated in enough of Lasker's schemes to be nervous about his own exposure, just nodded and changed the subject. That afternoon, when Lasker went to see his girlfriend, she was gone. Moved out, no forwarding address, a note that said simply, "I know what you are." He drove home in a rage, exceeding speed limits, running stop signs, daring the universe to give him something to fight. But when he arrived, his house was dark. His family was at his mother-in-law's. His wife had left a note, "We need space to think." And that's when he saw it spray-painted on his garage door, in letters that seemed to glow in the setting sun, "Thief." He spent 3 hours scrubbing it off his hands, raw and bleeding by the end. But the word remained burned into his retinas, following him into the house that now felt like a prison rather than a castle. Saturday morning, he showed up to coach football, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. The other parents noticed, whispered among themselves. Someone had started a rumor, not about his crimes, but about his drinking, about his gambling, about the debts he couldn't pay. Small-town rumors were their own kind of weapon, spreading faster than fire and twice as destructive. By noon, he'd been asked to step back from coaching just until things settled down. He spent Saturday afternoon drinking alone in his empty house, service weapon on the coffee table like a question he wasn't ready to answer. But Saturday night was when Marcus played his masterstroke. Lasker's phone rang at midnight. Unknown number, but he answered because he was drunk and angry and looking for someone to rage against. "Officer Lasker." The voice was calm, professional, untraceable. "You took something that wasn't yours." "Who the fuck is this?" "Someone who knows about the church money, the evidence skimming, the 18-year-old you framed for possession last year who killed himself in county lockup." "Should I continue?" Lasker's blood went cold. The suicide had been ruled unrelated to his arrest, but Lasker knew the truth. The kid had been innocent, the drugs planted, the despair manufactured by a system Lasker had weaponized. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something. You took $600 from an old woman. That was her survival, her dignity, her faith that somewhere in this broken system there might be justice." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Evelyn Carter, 76 years old. You robbed her on Birch Avenue 6 days ago." Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. "Here's what's going to happen," the voice continued. "You're going to return that money, you're going to apologize, and you're going to resign from the force. Like hell, or Monday morning everything gets released. The church theft, the evidence tampering, the 18-year-old's real story, your gambling debts to men who break legs for late payments. Your partner Brennan's already been contacted, he's willing to testify to save himself." That was a lie, but Lasker didn't know that. In his paranoia, everyone was a potential traitor now. "You can't prove any of this." "I don't have to prove it, I just have to release it. Let the court of public opinion decide. Let your wife decide. Let your children decide what kind of man their father really is." The line went dead. Lasker sat in his dark house, gun in one hand, phone in the other, understanding finally what his victims had always known, the weight of powerlessness, the suffocation of systemic force turned against you. But he was still Brent Lasker, still had his badge, his gun, his rage, and he knew where Evelyn Carter lived. Sunday morning came gray and humid, the sky pressing down like a judgment delayed but not denied. Marcus hadn't slept, hadn't needed to. He'd spent the night in position watching his mother's building from 3 different vantage points, knowing that pressure applied to men like Lasker produced predictable results. They lashed out. They attacked the vulnerable. They tried to reclaim power through violence. But Marcus had prepared for this too. Inside her apartment, Evelyn Carter wasn't alone. The neighbors had started gathering the night before, word spreading through the building that something was happening, that Mrs. Carter might need protection. They came with coffee and conversation, with presents that said, "We see you, we're here, you matter." There was Mrs. Washington from down the hall, whose grandson had been beaten by police 3 years ago. Mr. Rodriguez from the second floor, who'd had his car impounded on false pretenses and never returned. The Turner family from across the street, who'd watched their teenage son get stopped and frisked so many times he'd started taking different routes home just to avoid certain corners. They all had stories. They all had scars. And they all understood that tonight somehow was about more than just Mrs. Carter's $600. Pastor Williams arrived at dawn, his presence adding moral weight to their vigil. He'd brought others from the congregation, not many, but enough. Enough to fill the small apartment with witnesses, with phones ready to record, with the kind of communal strength that had seen them through darker times than this. "You don't have to do this," Evelyn told them. "This is my fight." "No, Mrs. Carter," Pastor Williams said gently. "This has never been just your fight. We've all been fighting it alone for too long. Maybe it's time we fought it together." Marcus watched this gathering through the scope of a rifle he had no intention of using, not for its intended purpose anyway. But the scope let him see everything, track every movement, ensure no surprises. At 9 a.m., Lasker's truck appeared, driving erratically, pulling into the parking lot at an angle that suggested he'd been drinking already, or still. Marcus watched him sit in the vehicle for 5 minutes, building courage or rage, or both. Finally he emerged, and Marcus's finger tensed on a trigger he wouldn't pull. Lasker was in civilian clothes, but had his service weapon visible tucked into his waistband, with the casual threat of a man who'd never faced consequences. He moved toward the building with the determined gait of someone who'd made a decision they couldn't unmake. But as he approached, the entrance doors began opening. Not just in Evelyn's building, but all along the street. People stepping out, not approaching, just watching, bearing witness, some with phones raised recording, others simply standing there, presence a statement. Lasker hesitated, looking around at the gathering crowd. These were the people he'd terrorized for years, the ones who'd always looked away, stayed silent, endured. But something was different now. They weren't afraid. Or rather, they were afraid, but standing anyway, which was its own kind of courage. He pushed through the entrance, took the stairs 2 at a time, his boots echoing in the stairwell like countdown to something irreversible. The door to Evelyn's apartment was open. Inside, she sat in her chair, surrounded by her community. The pastor stood behind her, hands on her shoulders. Others filled the small space, creating a human barrier of witness and protection. "Mrs. Carter," Lasker said, his voice trying for official but landing on desperate. "I need to speak with you, alone. Whatever you have to say to me, officer, you can say in front of everyone." He looked around the room, saw the phones recording, understood that whatever happened next would exist forever in digital memory. "You've been making false accusations. That's a crime." "The only crime here," Evelyn said quietly, "was committed by you. 6 days ago, on Birch Avenue. You're confused, old woman. Senile, maybe? Making up stories?" "Then why are you here?" Pastor Williams asked. "If she's just a confused old woman making up stories, why does she merit a Sunday morning visit from an off-duty officer?" Lasker's hand drifted toward his weapon, an unconscious tell that everyone in the room recognized. But before he could say anything more, another voice cut through the tension. "Officer Lasker." Tom Brennan stood in the doorway in full uniform, looking like a man who'd made his own difficult decision. "Tom, what are you—" "I'm here to take a statement from Mrs. Carter about the robbery that occurred 6 days ago." The betrayal hit Lasker like a physical blow. "You son of a bitch. I've been your partner for 6 years, Brent. I've watched you do a lot of things I should have stopped. But I'm stopping this one. You're part of this. Everything I've done, you've been right there." "I know." Brennan's voice was heavy with the weight of his complicity. "And I'll face consequences for that. But not today. Today is about Mrs. Carter's $600. Lasker laughed, then bitter and sharp. $600? You're burning everything down for $600 fucking. No! Evelyn said, standing slowly dignified despite her age and the tremor in her hands. We're building something up. Something you tried to tear down every time you put on that badge and used it as a weapon. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a photograph one Marcus had left for her the night before. It showed Lasker at the church, hand in the collection plate, taking what wasn't his. You want to talk about crimes, officer? Let's talk about all of them. Lasker saw the photo, understood its implications, realized the scope of what was happening to him. His hand went to his weapon, then not drawing it, but gripping it, the threat explicit. That's when the sirens became audible. Not one car, but several. Federal vehicles, because Marcus's final call hadn't been to local police, but to contacts who operated above Lasker's pay grade and protection. You should probably leave that weapon where it is, Brennan said quietly. This is bigger than both of us now. Lasker looked around the room one more time at the faces that reflected his sins back at him, at the cameras that had captured his downfall, at the old woman whose simple dignity had somehow triggered his complete destruction. Then he ran. Not far, there was nowhere to go. The federal agents were already in the building, already climbing the stairs. But he ran anyway, the way guilty men always run, even when there's nowhere to go but down. They caught him on the second-floor landing, tackled him with professional efficiency, cuffed him while reading rights he'd read to others 1,000 times. The last thing he saw before they dragged him away was Evelyn Carter standing at the top of the stairs watching his removal with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd waited a lifetime for justice and finally found it. The aftermath rippled through Millhaven like a stone dropped in still water. The federal investigation that started with Lasker expanded to encompass the entire department. 3 more officers were arrested. The police chief resigned. Brennan, in exchange for his testimony, received probation and lost his badge. A mercy he knew he didn't deserve, but accepted with the understanding that his second chance came with obligations. The money taken from citizens over the years couldn't all be recovered, but a settlement was reached. Evelyn Carter received her $600 back, plus damages that would ensure she never had to choose between medicine and food again. But more than money, she received something else, a voice. The story went viral, as stories do in the digital age. An elderly black woman standing up to corruption, a community rallying around her justice, served hot and fresh for once. She was interviewed by national media, spoke at conferences about police reform, became an unlikely icon for a movement that had been building for generations. "I'm not a hero," she would tell audiences. "I'm just someone who got tired of being afraid. And when you get tired enough, fear stops mattering." She never mentioned Marcus, never hinted at the ghost in the machine who'd orchestrated Lasker's downfall. When asked how everything came together so perfectly, she would just smile and say, "Sometimes the universe provides justice. We just have to be ready to receive it." Marcus watched from a distance, as he always did. He attended one of her speeches standing in the back, where shadows gathered, listening to his mother speak truth to power with a voice that had found its strength at 76. Afterward, she found him in the parking lot, sitting in a rental car he'd be returning under another name. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "My job isn't done, not the one that pays anyway." She leaned into the window, touched his face with hands that had held him as a baby, raised him as a boy, released him to become whatever he'd become. Was it worth it? Everything you risked. He thought about the question, about the line he'd crossed by going off book, about the consequences that might still come from using his skills for personal justice. "You're worth it, Mom. You've always been worth it." She kissed his forehead, a blessing and a goodbye wrapped in one gesture. "Don't be a stranger, but don't be too familiar either. I know what you are, son. And I know why you have to stay in the shadows. How's that?" She smiled, that knowing smile mothers perfect over decades. "Because the shadows are where you keep the monsters from getting to the rest of us." He drove away, then watching her in the rearview mirror, until she was just a silhouette against the setting sun. By morning, he would be Echo 1 again, deployed to some corner of the world where American interests needed protecting. But for these few days, he'd been something more important, a son who'd answered his mother's call. Brent Lasker was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He served 3 before an altercation with another inmate left him with injuries that would plague him the rest of his life, a limp that reminded him with every step of the power he'd once wielded and lost. He never knew about Marcus Carter, never understood the force that had dismantled his life with surgical precision. In his paranoia, he imagined vast conspiracies, federal agencies, civil rights organizations, all aligned against him. The truth was simpler and more terrifying: one man who loved his mother enough to burn down a corrupt system to keep her safe. Evelyn Carter lived another 8 years, each one fuller than the last. She became a grandmother to the neighborhood, a voice for the voiceless, a reminder that courage could come at any age. When she passed peacefully in her sleep, the funeral filled the largest church in Millhaven. The mayor spoke. The new police chief, a reform candidate who'd won in a landslide, served as a pallbearer. Marcus couldn't attend. He was somewhere in Eastern Europe doing things that would never make newspapers. But he watched via satellite feed as they laid his mother to rest, as hundreds of people whose lives she'd touched said goodbye. That night, in a safe house in Prague, Echo 1 allowed himself a moment of grief. Then he packaged it away, locked it down, became the weapon his country needed him to be. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the world wasn't ending and his skills weren't needed, Marcus Carter would remember a hot August day in Georgia, when his mother had written him a letter, when she'd asked for justice and he'd delivered it not through violence but through something more elegant, the complete dismantling of a man who'd thought his badge made him untouchable. He kept her letter always folded in a pocket close to his heart. A reminder of why he did what he did. Not for countries or governments or abstract ideals. For the Evelyn Carters of the world. The ones who stood up despite the weight pressing down. The ones who demanded justice even when the system was designed to deny it. The ones who deserved sons who would emerge from shadows when they called. The ones who proved that sometimes love was the most dangerous weapon of all. The federal agents were still processing Lasker in the parking lot when Marcus noticed something wrong. A black sedan, government plates but wrong sequence, had been circling the block for 20 minutes. The driver was too professional, the surveillance too obvious to be accidental. They wanted to be seen. Marcus's phone buzzed, a number he recognized but hadn't seen in 2 years. Echo 1. The voice belonged to Director Sarah Chen, someone who existed so far up the chain of command that most operatives never heard her speak. "We need to talk about your unauthorized absence." "I'm on my way back," Marcus said, watching his mother disappear into her building, safe for now, but forever changed by what had transpired. "No, you're not. You're going to meet my representative. Black sedan, northwest corner. You have 2 minutes to decide: comply or become a problem we need to solve." The line went dead. Marcus weighed his options. Running would mean abandoning everything, becoming truly ghost, leaving his mother vulnerable to retaliation from sources far more dangerous than small-town cops. Compliance meant facing consequences, but also meant maintaining his cover, his protection, his ability to operate. He walked to the sedan. The man inside was unfamiliar, which meant he was either very new or very specialized. Clean-shaven, unremarkable features designed to be forgotten, hands that stayed visible but ready. "Agent Carter," the man said as Marcus got in. Not his operational designation, but his real name, a message in itself. "I don't know you." "No, you don't. I'm Douglas, Internal Review. We need to discuss your recent activities." The car pulled away from the curb, driven by someone Marcus couldn't see through the tinted partition. They were heading north, away from Millhaven toward Atlanta, most likely. Neutral ground. "My mother was robbed," Marcus said simply. I took leave to address a family emergency. You took leave to dismantle a police officer using agency resources, techniques, and training. Douglas pulled out a tablet showing surveillance footage Marcus hadn't known existed. Him under Lasker's truck, him at the poker game, him making calls from burner phones. You've compromised operational security for personal revenge. Justice, Marcus corrected, and I used nothing that could be traced back to the agency. Everything you do can be traced back to us, Echo 1. You are us. Your skills, your methods, your very existence is a classified asset, and you used that asset to wage a personal war. They drove in silence for several miles, the tension building like pressure in a chamber. Finally, Douglas spoke again. Director Chen wants you to know she understands. Her own mother was murdered in a hate crime 30 years ago. The perpetrators were never caught, never even investigated properly. She knows the weight of that injustice. But she also knows that if every operative went rogue for personal justice, we'd have chaos. The system would collapse. The system's already collapsed, Marcus said, thinking of his mother's empty purse, of Lasker's sneer, of all the victims who never got their moment of reckoning. We're just pretending it hasn't. Douglas studied him for a long moment. That's why she's offering you a choice instead of a burn notice. There's an operation completely off the books, no official sanction. High risk, high value. The kind of thing that requires someone willing to color outside the lines. And if I refuse? Then your mother loses her son permanently. Not to death, but to a disappearance so complete she'll never even know what happened to you. You'll be erased, Echo 1. Not killed, we're not monsters, but relocated, redesignated, removed from any ability to return to this life. Marcus felt the trap closing, but recognized its necessity. This was how the game worked at the highest levels. Everything was leverage. Everything was negotiable. Everything had a price. What's the operation? Douglas smiled for the first time, and it wasn't reassuring. There's a man in Miami, Alexei Volkov, Russian oligarch turned information broker. He has files on every dirty secret in the Western Hemisphere, politicians, judges, police commissioners. He sells justice to the highest bidder, protection to the worst offenders. And among his clients is a network of corrupt cops across 6 states. Men like your Officer Lasker, but smarter, more connected, more careful. They pay Volkov for intelligence on federal investigations, for warning when they're being watched, for protection when their crimes catch up. Marcus understood immediately. This wasn't punishment, it was weaponization. Chen was taking his personal crusade and aiming it at a larger target. You want me to take down Volkov? We want you to become him. Volkov's about to have an accident. Nothing traceable, nothing suspicious to his organization. You'll step in as his American lieutenant, someone he's been grooming in secret. You'll have access to his files, his network, his entire operation. And then you'll do what you did to Lasker, but on a massive scale. Dismantle the network from inside. Every corrupt cop, every protected predator, every purchased verdict. You'll be the ghost in their machine, Echo 1. The justice they thought they'd paid to avoid. The car had stopped. They were in a parking garage, middle level, no other vehicles visible. Douglas handed him a folder, thick, detailed, the kind of intelligence package that took months to compile. You have 48 hours to decide. Your mother will be protected regardless, that's Director Chen's promise. But this is your only chance to come back into the fold. Otherwise, Marcus Carter dies today, and Echo 1 becomes someone else entirely. Marcus took the folder, feeling its weight like a sentence and an opportunity combined. And if I succeed, then you become something new. Not just an operative, but an architect of justice. Working outside official channels, but with unofficial blessing. The kind of weapon we need, but can never acknowledge. Douglas opened the door, gestured for Marcus to exit. There was another car waiting, keys in the ignition. Georgia plates. Nothing remarkable about it. 48 hours, Agent Carter. Make your choice. Marcus drove back to Millhaven in contemplation, the folder beside him like a passenger demanding attention. He thought about his mother, about the community that had rallied around her, about Lasker in federal custody, probably already trying to make deals. But mostly he thought about the names in that folder. The victims who didn't have sons trained in violence and subterfuge. The Evelyn Carters who suffered in silence because the system designed to protect them had been purchased by their predators. He arrived at his mother's apartment as dusk was settling over the city. She was on her small balcony watering plants that struggled to survive in the Georgia heat, but bloomed anyway through pure stubbornness. "You're leaving again," she said without turning around. "How did you know?" "You have that look. The one that says you're about to disappear into whatever darkness you inhabit when you're not here." He stood beside her, looking out over Millhaven, this small town that had shaped him, broken him, rebuilt him into something dangerous. "I can stay," he said, meaning it. "I can walk away from all of it, get a real job, be a real son." She laughed, soft and knowing. "Baby, you haven't been a real anything since you were 18 years old. You became something else, something necessary. Don't pretend otherwise now." "Mom." "I see the news, Marcus. I see the wars that don't get declared, the terrorists who disappear before they can act, the threats that never materialize. I know my son is somewhere in those shadows keeping the monsters at bay. And I know that's who you are now. Who you need to be." She finally turned to look at him, and her eyes held the kind of love that saw everything and accepted it anyway. "So go. Do whatever it is you do. But remember something, justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration. It's about making the broken things whole again. Don't lose sight of that in the darkness." He hugged her, then held her like he might never get another chance. She felt fragile in his arms, but also eternal, like some forces were too fundamental to ever really die. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, baby. Now go, before I start crying and embarrass us both." He left her there with her struggling plants and her hard-won peace. In the car, he opened the folder again, studying the faces of men who thought their badges and connections made them untouchable. Men who were about to learn otherwise. 48 hours to decide, Douglas had said. But Marcus had already decided the moment he'd seen those files. The moment he'd recognized the patterned predators using the system to hunt, protected by money and influence, and the kind of corruption that went all the way to the top. He made a call from a phone that would be destroyed within the hour. "This is Echo 1, he said when the encrypted line connected. "I'm in." "Excellent." Director Chen's voice was warm with something that might have been satisfaction or might have been relief. "Your flight to Miami leaves in 3 hours. Everything you need is already in place. And my mother will be protected by the best we have. She'll never know they're there, but anyone who even thinks about threatening her will find themselves facing resources they can't imagine." Marcus started driving toward the airport, toward a new identity, toward a war that would be fought in boardrooms and back alleys with information instead of bullets, with fear instead of force. Behind him, Millhaven settled into night. Evelyn Carter finished watering her plants and went inside to make tea, to watch the news, to see what kind of world her son was trying to save. She didn't know the specifics of what he did, didn't want to know. But she knew he was out there, her boy who'd become a weapon fighting battles in the dark so others could live in the light. The first news report about Officer Lasker's arrest was just beginning. She watched with satisfaction as they showed him in handcuffs, head down, all his arrogance drained away. The reporter was talking about systemic corruption, about federal investigations, about a community that had finally found its voice. But Evelyn knew the truth. One voice had made this happen. One son who'd heard his mother's cry for justice and had answered with the kind of power that toppled dynasties. She smiled, sipping her tea, thinking about her plants on the balcony. They struggled, yes, but they bloomed. Sometimes that was all you could ask for, to bloom. Despite the drought, to find beauty in the struggle, to know that somewhere in the shadows, someone was fighting for your right to reach toward the sun. Miles away on a plane climbing into the night sky, Marcus Carter ceased to exist. In his place sat Michael Volkov, nephew of a Russian oligarch trained in Moscow, refined in America, ready to take over an empire built on corruption. The flight attendant offered him a drink. He declined, pulled out the folder instead, studying his new identity with the same precision he'd once used to study targets for elimination. But these targets were different. These weren't enemies of the state, but enemies of justice itself. Men who'd perverted the system so thoroughly that only someone operating outside it could restore balance. His phone, a new one encrypted beyond any civilian technology, buzzed with a message. Your uncle had an unfortunate accident. Heart attack in his Moscow apartment. You're needed in Miami immediately to handle his American operations. Marcus deleted the message, knowing that somewhere in Moscow, the real Alexei Volkov was being removed from the board. Not killed. Chen had been specific about that, but relocated, given a new identity, a comfortable prison in some forgotten corner of the world where he could live, but never again corrupt. The plane flew through the night carrying Echo 1 toward his new war. Below, America sprawled in darkness, punctuated by lights, cities full of Evelyn Carter's communities, full of people just trying to survive, all of them vulnerable to the predators who'd learned to use badges and positions as hunting licenses. But the predators had made a mistake. They'd hurt the wrong person's mother. They'd triggered something they couldn't understand, couldn't fight, couldn't buy their way out of. Justice was coming, wearing a Russian name and American training, armed with the kind of skills that had toppled governments and ended wars before they began. It would move through their networks like a virus, dismantling their protections, exposing their crimes, turning their own systems against them. And somewhere in Georgia, an elderly woman would tend her plants and sleep peacefully, knowing that her son was out there in the darkness, fighting the kind of war that never made headlines, but changed everything anyway. The businessman in seat 3A was reading a newspaper headline visible, "Federal investigation expands hundreds of officers under scrutiny." He shook his head, muttered something about the country going to hell. Marcus smiled slightly. If only the man knew who was sitting beside him. If only he understood that the investigation he was reading about was just the beginning. Just the first rumble of an earthquake that would reshape the landscape of American law enforcement. But that was the beauty of operating in shadows. Nobody saw you coming until it was too late to run. The plane flew on through darkness toward Miami, toward a new identity, toward a reckoning years in the making. Marcus closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to remember his mother's face when she'd stood up to Lasker, the community gathering around her, the moment when fear transformed into power. That was what this was about. Not revenge, but transformation. Not just removing the corrupt, but empowering their victims. Not just ending injustice, but beginning restoration. His mother had been right, as she usually was. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about making broken things whole again. And Marcus Carter. Echo 1. Michael Volkov, whoever he needed to be, was going to break and rebuild until the system actually served the people it claimed to protect. The war had begun with 600 stolen dollars. It would end with the complete transformation of American justice. Or he would die trying. But first, Miami. First, establishing himself as Volkov's heir. First, gaining access to the files that would give him targets, leverage the architectural plans of a corrupt system he was about to demolish. The flight attendant passed by again, and this time he accepted water. He had work to do, identities to memorize, an uncle to mourn publicly, while privately celebrating the removal of another predator from the board. 3 hours to Miami. 3 hours to complete his transformation from Marcus Carter to Michael Volkov. 3 hours to prepare for a war that would be fought with information and intimidation, with fear and finance, with all the tools the corrupt had used to maintain their power now turned against them. His mother had asked for justice for $600. She was about to get justice for millions. And Officer Brent Lasker, sitting in federal custody awaiting trial, had no idea that his robbery of an elderly woman had triggered something that would reshape American law enforcement forever. The plane descended through clouds toward the lights of Miami, toward a future where badges wouldn't be shields for predators, where communities wouldn't have to choose between poverty and humiliation, where Evelyn Carters everywhere could walk their streets without fear. It was an impossible goal, a war that couldn't be won, a transformation that the system would resist with every resource at its disposal. Marcus smiled in the darkness of the cabin. Impossible was what he did best. The Miami air hit Marcus like a wet blanket as he exited the plane thick with salt and decay. The kind of humidity that made everything feel like it was rotting from the inside out. A driver was waiting holding a sign that read M. Volkov in Cyrillic script, a touch that would have been his uncle's idea of subtle. The man was Russian, or at least played the part well. Thick accent, dead eyes, hands that had done violent work and would again. "Mr. Volkov, your uncle's associates are waiting." Marcus nodded, slipping into character with the ease of changing clothes. His Russian was flawless, learned not in classrooms, but in killing fields, where the wrong accent meant a bullet. "How many?" "7. They are anxious about transition." Anxious was a gentle word for what awaited him. Alexei Volkov had run his organization like a medieval kingdom through fear and favor, keeping his lieutenants hungry and suspicious of each other. Now the king was dead, and the princes were circling. The drive to the compound took 40 minutes through Miami traffic that seemed to operate on its own physics. Marcus used the time to review the files Douglas had provided, memorizing names, faces, crimes. These 7 men controlled different aspects of Volkov's empire: drugs from South America, weapons from Eastern Europe, and most importantly, information from everywhere. The compound itself was a testament to paranoid wealth. 15-foot walls topped with razor wire that gleamed in the afternoon sun, cameras every 20 feet, and the kind of subtle defensive positions that suggested someone inside understood siege warfare. The gates opened slowly, reluctantly, like the mouth of something that might swallow you whole. Inside the house was all marble and menace. White floors that would show blood, glass walls that could become weapons art that cost more than most people's lives. And in the main room, 7 men who looked at Marcus like butchers evaluating meat. "Gentlemen," Marcus said in Russian, then switched to accented English, the kind that suggested education, but not comfort. "My uncle's death is a tragedy, but business continues." "You are boy," said the largest of them, Viktor Kedrov, who ran the drug routes. 300 pounds of muscle gone to fat, but still dangerous. Alexei never mentioned nephew. "My uncle mentioned many things to many people," Marcus replied smoothly. "He told each what they needed to know. I was his insurance policy, trained in Moscow, refined here, kept secret until needed." "We need proof," another said, Dmitry Orlov, who handled the weapons. Thin where Victor was, large nervous energy radiating from him like heat. "Anyone can claim to be heir." Marcus pulled out a phone, entered a 30-digit code from memory, and suddenly every screen in the room displayed financial records. Their financial records. Every bribe paid, every dollar laundered, every transaction they thought was hidden. "My uncle taught me everything," Marcus said as they stared at their secrets made visible. "Including where the bodies are buried, both literally and figuratively. Each of you has been skimming. Small amounts, careful, but consistent. Victor takes 2% from every Colombian shipment. Dmitry inflates weapons costs by 5%. Should I continue?" The room went cold despite the Miami heat. These were killing offenses in Volkov's organization, the kind of theft that usually ended with pieces of you scattered across the Everglades. "But my uncle is dead." Marcus continued, closing the phone, making their secrets disappear. "And I am not him. I believe in different motivations. You've all proven yourselves competent. The skimming shows initiative, intelligence. I want partners, not servants." "Partners." Victor's eyes narrowed with suspicion and interest. 70-30 split instead of 90-10. You manage your territories with autonomy. In exchange, absolute loyalty and expansion of our information network. "The cops," Orlov said. "That was Alexei's prize. His network of purchased police. Will continue," Marcus assured them. "In fact, it will expand. My uncle thought small 6 states, I think nationally. Every major city, every federal agency we can reach. Not just protection, but active partnership. We become the shadow system that runs alongside the official one. He could see them calculating greed, overwhelming suspicion. These were men who'd survived in Volkov's organization through careful brutality, who understood power only as something taken, not given. Marcus was offering them something they'd never had genuine opportunity. There is test, Victor said finally. Miami detective Raymond Chen. He's been investigating our operations, cannot be bought. Alexei was planning to remove him. Marcus knew about Chen from the files. Decorated detective, clean record, a wife and 2 daughters. The kind of man who'd joined law enforcement for the right reasons and somehow hadn't been corrupted yet. Kill him, Marcus asked, knowing the answer. No, destroy him. Make him example. Show police what happens when they cannot be purchased. This was the test within the test. Not just whether Marcus could neutralize a threat, but whether he could do it with the particular cruelty that marked Volkov operations. They wanted to see the monster his uncle had been needed to know. The same darkness lived in his air. Give me 3 days, Marcus said. Detective Chen will be destroyed so completely that his own mother won't defend him. They smiled at that, the way predators smile when they recognize one of their own. Hands were shaken, vodka was poured, and Marcus found himself accepted into a brotherhood of corruption that would have made his mother weep. But Marcus had his own plans for Detective Raymond Chen. That night he sat in the study that had been his uncle's, surrounded by the props of a dead man's empire. The walls were lined with photographs, Volkov, with politicians, with judges, with police commissioners. Each picture represented a soul purchased, a piece of justice eroded. He pulled up Chen's file on a secure terminal. The detective was everything the Russian lieutenant said, incorruptible, dedicated, dangerous to their operations. But he was also isolated. His refusal to take bribes had marked him as an outsider in his own department. His partner had requested transfer. His captain viewed him as a liability. Perfect. Marcus made a call to a number that existed in no database. Echo 1, Director Chen answered. No relation to the detective, just one of those cosmic coincidences that occasionally occurred. I need a favor. Detective Raymond Chen, Miami PD. He's about to be destroyed by Volkov's organization. And you want to save him. I want to recruit him. He's clean in a dirty system, isolated, about to lose everything. If we intervene at the right moment, we can turn him into an asset. Someone inside Miami PD who knows we're watching, who can feed us intelligence on the corrupt cops in Volkov's network. That's not extraction, Echo 1. That's manipulation. That's opportunity. Chen wants to fight corruption but has no tools. We give him tools. He gives us intelligence. Everyone wins, except the corrupt. There was silence on the line, the kind that preceded either agreement or termination. Do it. But if this compromises your cover, you're on your own. The line went dead, and Marcus began planning the destruction and resurrection of Detective Raymond Chen. The next morning he met with Victor and Orlov in a warehouse that smelled of motor oil and violence. They'd brought tools, not the crude instruments of torture, but sophisticated equipment for destroying lives digitally. Chen has weakness, Victor said, showing Marcus photographs. Gambling brother owes money to wrong people. We use this. It was almost too easy. The brother David Chen owed $40,000 to a bookie with connections to Volkov's organization. He'd been skimming from his employer to pay it down, small amounts, but consistent. Detective Chen had been covering for him, not with money, but with silence, not reporting what he suspected. We frame the detective, Orlov suggested. Make it look like he's been taking our money to protect his brother. Photos, bank records, witnesses who will swear they saw him at meetings. Marcus nodded along, playing the part of the eager heir learning the family business. But that night he made his own moves. He visited David Chen, first appearing in the man's apartment like a ghost made flesh. David was 35, but looked 50, worn down by addiction and fear. The kind of man who'd been falling so long, he'd forgotten what solid ground felt like. Who are you? David's voice shook as Marcus emerged from the shadows of his kitchen. Someone who can make your problems disappear. or make them infinitely worse. Your choice. I don't have any money. I don't want money. I want you to listen very carefully and do exactly what I tell you. Your brother is about to be destroyed because of your debts. The people you owe are going to frame him, end his career, probably get him killed in prison. David's face crumbled. Ray doesn't deserve. No, he doesn't. Which is why you're going to help me save him. Tomorrow, you're going to confess everything to him. The debts, the stealing, all of it. He's going to arrest you publicly, dramatically. It's going to look like he chose justice over family. He'll never... He will if you tell him the truth. That refusing means both of you die. That arresting you is the only way to save both your lives. Marcus placed a burner phone on the table. When it rings tomorrow at exactly 2 p.m., answer it. Follow the instructions perfectly. He left David there trembling and confused and moved on to his next visit. Detective Raymond Chen lived in a modest house in a neighborhood that straddled the line between respectable and dangerous. Marcus watched him through the window. Chen, at his kitchen table, reviewing case files, still working even at midnight, still believing the system could be saved from within. Marcus didn't enter, not yet. Instead, he left something on Chen's doorstep, a single folder containing everything. Volkov's organization, chart the names of corrupt cops, the plans to destroy him. Everything except Marcus's real identity. The note attached was simple. They're coming for you. Your brother is the weapon. Choose justice or family. 2 p.m. tomorrow. Be ready. By morning, the pieces were in motion. Chen found the folder, read it, with the growing horror of a man realizing the scope of his enemy. David called him, confessing everything through tears and terror. Victor and Orlov prepared their frame job, not knowing their target was already aware. At exactly 2 p.m., the burner phone rang. Detective Chen. Marcus said, his voice electronically distorted. Your brother is at First National Bank downtown branch. He's about to rob it to pay his debts. You can stop him, arrest him publicly, or you can let Volkov's people frame you for protecting him. Who are you? Someone who believes one clean cop is worth more than a dozen dirty ones. You have 10 minutes to decide. Chen didn't need 10 minutes. He was already moving, calling for backup, racing toward the bank where his brother stood in the lobby, gun in hand, unloaded. But nobody else knew that, playing the part of desperate man about to do something irreversible. The arrest was perfect television. Detective Chen taking down his own brother, choosing duty over blood, the kind of drama that news stations dream about. Within hours, it was everywhere. The incorruptible cop who arrested his own family. The detective who couldn't be bought, not even with blood. Victor and Orlov were furious, but also impressed. He arrested his own brother, Victor said, watching the news in disbelief. Before we could frame him. Makes him untouchable now, Orlov added. A hero. We can't destroy hero without looking like villains. Sometimes the best victory is knowing when not to fight, Marcus said, playing the wise air. Chen is neutralized. He'll be so busy being a hero dealing with family drama that he won't have time for our operations. And if he becomes a problem again, well, his brother is in the system now. Leverage we can use whenever we need. They accepted this grudgingly, seeing wisdom in patience, even if they preferred violence. But that night, Detective Chen received another call. You saved my life, Chen said without preamble. I gave you an option. You saved yourself. Marcus's voice was still distorted but warmer now. Your brother will get 2 years minimum security. He'll get clean inside if he wants to. You'll be promoted, given resources, trusted. Use them. To do what? To fight the corruption you've been swimming in. I'll feed you intelligence when I can. Names, dates, evidence. You build cases, make arrests, clean house. Why? What do you get out of it? Marcus thought about his mother, about $600 stolen, about justice being more than punishment. I get to watch the system fix itself from within, one clean cop at a time. He hung up before Chen could respond, then went back to being Michael Volkov, nephew of a monster, heir to an empire of corruption. The next weeks passed in careful orchestration. Marcus expanded the network as promised, bringing in corrupt cops from Atlanta, New Orleans, Houston. Each one was documented, recorded, filed away for future use. He met with politicians who spoke about law and order while taking briefcases full of cash. He sat with judges who perverted justice for the price of their children's college tuition. And through it all, he fed intelligence to Detective Chen. Small pieces at first, a drug shipment here, a weapons cache there. Enough to build Chen's reputation to get him promoted to head of a new anti-corruption task force to give him the tools he needed. But Marcus was playing a longer game. Every corrupt cop in the network received a special phone, encrypted and untraceable, or so they believed. In reality, each one was a recording device capturing every conversation, every confession, every crime. The data flowed to servers that didn't officially exist, building files that would eventually destroy careers, end dynasties, reshape the landscape of American law enforcement. Victor and Orlov saw only the expansion, the profits, the growing power. They brought him more lieutenants, more territory, more influence. The organization grew like a cancer. But it was a cancer Marcus was documenting, mapping, preparing to excise. 3 months into his new identity, Marcus received a message that made his blood run cold. "We have a problem," Victor said, entering his office without knocking. "Your old city, Millhaven. The federal investigation has expanded. They're looking at our connections there." Marcus kept his face neutral even as his heart raced. "Our connections. Lasker was paying us for protection information. If the feds dig deep enough, they'll find the payments. Trail leads back here." This was the danger of interconnected corruption. Pull one thread, and the whole tapestry could unravel. Lasker's arrest had started something that threatened to expose everything, including Marcus's cover. "What do you suggest?" Marcus asked. "Lasker needs to have accident. Before he can make deal, tell what he knows." Marcus's mind raced. He couldn't let them kill Lasker, not because the man deserved to live, but because his death would trigger even more investigation. But he also couldn't appear weak, couldn't refuse, without raising suspicion. "Killing him makes us look guilty," Marcus said carefully. "But there are other ways to ensure silence." He pulled up Lasker's file on his screen. The man was in federal custody in Atlanta, awaiting trial, probably trying to make deals exactly as Victor feared. "His family," Marcus said. "Wife and children. They're vulnerable now, unprotected. We make it clear that his silence keeps them safe. His testimony means they suffer." It was a monstrous suggestion, one that made him sick to propose. But it was also exactly what Michael Volkov would suggest, what these men expected from their leader. Victor smiled approvingly. "You think like your uncle, but with more subtlety. Send someone to watch them. Nothing aggressive, just visible. Let Lasker know we're there. Fear is more effective than violence." Victor left to make arrangements, and Marcus immediately made his own call. "Director Chen, we have a problem. They want to threaten Lasker's family to ensure his silence. His family are civilians, which is why you're going to protect them without them knowing it. Put a team on them, invisible but present. If Volkov's people get close, intervene, but make it look random: car trouble, police patrol, anything that doesn't blow my cover." "This is getting complicated, Echo 1. It was always complicated, but in 3 more months I'll have enough to take down the entire network. Every corrupt cop, every purchased politician, everyone in Volkov's organization. The complete architecture of corruption on the Eastern Seaboard." 3 months is a long time. Justice takes time. My mother waited 76 years for hers. 3 months is nothing. The line went dead, and Marcus returned to his role. That evening, he met with a police captain from Jacksonville who wanted to expand his protection racket. The man was everything wrong with law enforcement badge, as a weapon authority, as a commodity justice, as a joke. "Mr. Volkov," the captain said, sweating despite the air conditioning. "I can deliver half the department, for the right price." "The price is not the issue," Marcus replied. Reliability is. How do I know you won't betray us the moment a better offer arrives? Because I'm already in too deep. 3 bodies that disappeared because of me. 2 witnesses who changed their testimony after I visited them. A rival dealer who died in custody. You want insurance? I'm a walking insurance policy. Marcus smiled and poured the man a drink, watching him relax, watching him believe he'd won. The recorder in Marcus's watch captured every word, every confession, every nail in the coffin the captain was building for himself. Welcome to the family, Marcus said, and shook hands with another monster who thought he was untouchable. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus stood on the balcony of the compound, looking out over Miami's lights. Somewhere out there, Detective Chen was building cases with the intelligence Marcus fed him. Somewhere in Atlanta, federal agents were protecting Lasker's family without them knowing it. Somewhere in Mill Haven, his mother was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her son was waging war on her behalf. The phone in his pocket buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Thank you for protecting them. It took him a moment to realize it was from Lasker's wife. Somehow she'd figured out that someone was watching, protecting, ensuring her children's safety while their father awaited trial for his crimes. Marcus deleted the message without responding. He couldn't afford sentiment, couldn't let emotion compromise the operation. But something in that simple thank you reminded him of what his mother had said. Justice wasn't just about punishment, but restoration. He thought about all the families destroyed by corruption, all the communities hollowed out by predatory policing, all the victims who'd never gotten their moment of reckoning. The network he was building inside Volkov's organization would give them that moment. Not just revenge, but revelation. Not just punishment, but the possibility of something better rising from the ashes. A sound from inside made him turn. Orlov stood in the doorway, gun drawn but not quite aimed. Dmitri, Marcus said calmly. Something wrong? You are not who you say you are. Marcus's hand drifted toward his own weapon, calculating distances, angles, probabilities. Everyone is not who they say they are. That's the nature of our business. No, you are something else. You move like soldier, but think like spy. You expand network, but document everything. You are not heir, you are infiltrator. This was the moment Marcus had trained for, planned for, dreaded. Discovery not through error, but through intuition, the kind of suspicion that couldn't be argued away. You're right, Marcus said simply. Orlov's eyes widened, the gun rising slightly. I'm not just Alexei's heir, Marcus continued. I'm his evolution. He built an empire on fear and greed. I'm building something larger. Not just corruption, but complete parallel system. Not just protection, but partnership with forces you can't imagine. Government. Beyond government. Beyond nations. The people who actually run things, who decide which governments rise and fall, which economies thrive or collapse. Marcus stepped closer, watching Orlov's finger on the trigger. I'm offering you a choice. Die here now knowing you were right, but accomplishing nothing. Or join something larger than Volkov ever imagined. You would trust me. After this. I trust your greed, your ambition, your understanding that sometimes the best way to survive is to side with the winner. Marcus pulled out his phone, showed Orlov a bank account, $50 million with Orlov's name on it. That's just the beginning. Stay loyal, help me transform this organization, and you'll have more money and power than Volkov ever offered. Orlov stared at the screen at a number that represented everything he'd ever wanted. The gun lowered slowly. What do you need from me? Everything continues as normal. Victor and the others suspect nothing, but you report to me directly. And when the time comes, when I give the signal, you help me clean house, remove the liabilities, keep the assets, transform this from criminal organization to something untouchable. Orlov holstered his weapon. You are dangerous man, Michael Volkov, or whoever you really are. I'm exactly who I need to be, Marcus replied. The question is, Who do you want to be, Dmitry Orlov, who died questioning his boss, or Dmitry Orlov, who helped build an empire? The choice was made before he asked it. Men like Orlov always chose survival, always chose profit, always chose power over principle. It's what made them useful and ultimately disposable. They shook hands in the darkness, sealing a deal that would eventually destroy everything Orlov had known. But for now, Marcus had an ally inside, another piece on the board, another step toward the complete dismantling of the corruption that had started with 600 stolen dollars. The war was far from over. But tonight, in this moment with Miami spread below him like a map of possibilities and threats, Marcus felt the tide turning. The predators were becoming prey. The corrupt were documenting their own destruction. And somewhere in Georgia, an elderly woman was tending her plants, unaware that her simple act of writing a letter had started something that would reshape American justice forever. 3 more months, Marcus thought. 3 more months of wearing a monster's face, of swimming in corruption without drowning in it, of playing a game where losing meant not just death, but the failure of everything he'd promised his mother. 3 more months, and then the reckoning would begin. The 3 months Marcus had promised Director Chen were almost up when everything started unraveling. It began with a phone call at 3 a.m., the kind that never brought good news. "Your mother," Orlov said, and Marcus's blood turned to ice. "She is in hospital." Marcus was moving before the call ended, grabbing weapons documents, everything that mattered. What happened? Heart episode. Not attack, but warning. She's stable, but Marcus. Orlov used his real name, a sign of how serious this was. "Victor knows who you are." The words hit like physical blows. His mother in danger, his cover blown, everything collapsing at once. How? He had someone digging deeper into Lasker case. Found connection, your mother's name in the reports, the timing of your arrival after her robbery. He's planning to use her as leverage. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities, all of them bad. Victor wouldn't just expose him, he'd make an example, the kind that would echo through the criminal underworld for decades. And he'd use Evelyn to do it. Where is Victor now? Moving toward Georgia with 6 men. Maybe 8 hours ahead of you. Marcus, I'm sorry. I only just found out. Marcus ended the call and made another immediately. Director Chen, abort everything. My cover's blown and they're going after my mother. Extraction team can be there in no time. I'm going myself. And Director, when this is over, we need to talk about how Victor got information that should have been classified. He didn't wait for a response. Every second mattered now. The 3-hour flight to Atlanta felt like 3 years each minute, another opportunity for Victor to get closer to his mother. Marcus used the time to arm himself, not just with weapons, but with the rage he'd been keeping carefully controlled for months. The hospital in Millhaven was the same one where his sister had died, where his father had taken his last breath. The Carter family had too much history in these halls, too much grief soaked into the walls. But when Marcus arrived, moving through back entrances, he remembered from childhood, he found his mother's room empty, except for a note. Echo 1. It read in Victor's blocky handwriting. Your mother is safe, for now. Come alone to where this started. You have 1 hour. Where this started? Birch Avenue, the spot where Lasker had robbed her. Marcus arrived with 40 minutes to spare, but Victor was already there with his men. They'd blocked off both ends of the street, creating a kill box with no good exits. His mother sat in a wheelchair in the middle of the street, looking fragile, but unafraid, the same dignity she'd shown when Lasker had robbed her. Michael, Victor called out, using the fake name with mocking emphasis. Or should I say, Marcus or Echo 1, so many names for one man. Marcus stepped into the open hands, visible but ready. Let her go, Victor. This is between us. Nothing is just between us. You destroyed my uncle's empire from within, fed information to police, to government. You think we don't know about Detective Chen? About the federal agents protecting Lasker's family? You think we're stupid. I think you're smart enough to know you can't win this. Even if you kill us both, everything I've gathered is already in federal hands. Your organization is finished. Victor laughed, the sound echoing off abandoned storefronts. Maybe, but you'll be dead. Your mother will be dead, and message will be sent nobody infiltrates us and loves. My son. Evelyn spoke for the first time, her voice carrying despite its frailty. Has already won. You just don't know it yet. Victor backhanded her casually, the crack echoing in the night. Marcus took a step forward and 6 guns swung toward him. Tough old woman, Victor said. Like my grandmother in Russia. She survived, Stalin survived the war, survived everything. You know what killed her? Random thief wanting her wedding ring. All that survival and random violence ended it. He pulled out his own gun, placed it against Evelyn's temple. Fitting no. Your story started with theft, ends with execution. Wait, Marcus said, seeing movement in his peripheral vision. Not Victor's men, something else. You want me to suffer, killing her quick doesn't accomplish that. You're right. Victor moved the gun away slightly. Tell me, Echo 1, how many men have you killed? Dozens, hundreds, all that training, all those skills, and you couldn't protect one old woman. The movement Marcus had seen resolved into shapes, neighbors, the same ones who'd gathered in his mother's apartment months ago. Mrs. Washington, Mr. Rodriguez, the Turner family, but also others, dozens of others. All holding phones, all recording, all stepping out of shadows where they'd been waiting. You brought audience, Victor said, amused. Good. Let them witness what happens to heroes. But then more movement. Detective Chen stepping out from behind a parked car, badge, visible gun drawn. Miami Police, weapons down, now. Victor laughed again. You have no jurisdiction here, detective. No, but I do. Special Agent Sarah Chen. Different person, cosmic coincidence of names, emerged with a full tactical team. Federal agents. Everyone freeze. The standoff crystallized Victor's men with guns on Marcus and Evelyn. Federal agents with guns on Victor's men, everyone waiting for someone else to make the first move. Stalemate, Victor said. Anyone shoots, everyone dies, starting with her. He pressed the gun harder against Evelyn's temple. You're assuming, a new voice said, that all your men are actually yours. Orlov stepped away from Victor's group, moving to stand with the federal agents. 2 others followed. Half of Victor's force had just switched sides. You! Victor's face contorted with rage and betrayal. I told you he was something more, Orlov said simply. You should have listened. The calculus had changed, but Victor still had the gun to Evelyn's head, still had the only leverage that mattered. Marcus could see his finger tightening on the trigger, could see the decision being made. Time slowed the way it did in combat, each second, stretching into hours of possibility. Marcus had 17 different ways to try to save his mother. 16 of them ended with her dead. The 17th required something else entirely. Mom, Marcus said quietly. Remember what Dad used to say about fear? Evelyn's eyes met his, and in them he saw not terror, but understanding. That it's just another word for opportunity. She moved then, 76 years old, but still quick, still the woman who'd survived everything life had thrown at her. Her hand came up, not to grab the gun, but to grab Victor's wrist, yanking it away from her head as she threw herself sideways out of the wheelchair. The gun fired, the sound enormous in the night, but the bullet went wide. Marcus was already moving, crossing the 20 feet between them in less than 2 seconds. His hand found Victor's throat as they went down together, rolling across asphalt, still warm from the day's heat. Gunfire erupted around them, federal agents engaging Victor's remaining men, the night exploding into violence. But Marcus's world had narrowed to Victor's face, to the man who'd threatened his mother, to the representative of every corrupt force that preyed on the vulnerable. You want to know how many men I've killed? Marcus whispered as Victor struggled beneath him. 137. You would have been 138. Would have been, Victor gasped out. Marcus's grip loosened slightly. My mother asked for justice, not vengeance. So you get to live Victor. You get to spend the next 40 years in federal prison remembering this moment. Remembering that an old woman you dismissed as nothing was stronger than you ever were. Federal agents pulled them apart, cuffing Victor as he spat curses in 3 languages. Marcus ignored him, moving to where his mother sat on the ground, Mrs. Washington, holding her, checking for injuries. "I'm all right," Evelyn said, as Marcus knelt beside her. "Takes more than that Russian fool to break me. You could have been killed. So could you. Every day for how many years? At least I knew what I was fighting for." Sirens were arriving, local police ambulances, news vans. The quiet street where this had all started was becoming a circus. But in the middle of it, mother and son sat together, her hand in his, both understanding that something had ended and something else had begun. "It's over," Marcus said. "No, baby," Evelyn replied, looking at the crowd gathering at the cameras recording at Detective Chen, directing the scene with newfound authority. "It's just starting. You lit a fuse with what you did. Every corrupt cop in that network, every person who paid for protection, they're all exposed now. This is going to reshape everything." She was right. Over the next weeks, the revelations came like dominoes falling. 312 arrests across 6 states, 17 police chiefs resigned. 43 judges were removed from the bench. The network Marcus had mapped from inside Volkov's organization became the blueprint for the largest anti-corruption operation in American history. Detective Raymond Chen led much of it, using the intelligence Marcus had provided to build airtight cases. The clean cops, the ones who'd been marginalized and mocked for their integrity, suddenly found themselves promoted and empowered. The system broken for so long began the slow process of healing itself. Officer Brent Lasker, watching from federal prison, saw his fellow corrupt officers arriving daily. His deal for reduced sentence evaporated as prosecutors realized they didn't need his testimony. Marcus's recordings provided everything. He would serve his full 15 years every day, a reminder of the moment he'd chosen to rob an elderly woman of $600. Tom Brennan, Lasker's former partner, became a key witness for the prosecution. His testimony, combined with his genuine remorse, earned him probation and a chance to speak at police academies about how corruption spreads and why it must be stopped. But the most profound change happened in communities like Millhaven. The fear that had kept people silent for generations began to lift. Citizens started filming police encounters, not out of hostility, but out of empowerment. Review boards were established with real power. Police departments instituted new training, new accountability, new understanding that their badges were shields to protect, not swords to threaten. Marcus watched most of this from a distance. His cover as Michael Volkov was blown, his usefulness as an undercover asset compromised. Director Chen offered him a desk job coordinating intelligence training new operatives. "I can't," Marcus told her in what would be their last official conversation. "I've been in the shadows so long, I don't know how to live in the light." "Your mother would want you to try." "My mother wants me to be who I am, and who I am is someone who operates in darkness to protect those in light." He disappeared after that, the way he'd been trained to do. New identity, new purpose, but the same mission, finding corruption where it festered and cutting it out before it could spread. But first he went home. Evelyn was in her garden when he arrived, the one she'd started in the vacant lot next to her building. The landlord had given permission after everything that happened, and the community had rallied to help. Tomatoes growing where trash had accumulated, flowers blooming where needles had been scattered. Transformation through patient work and care. "I wondered when you'd come," she said without looking up from the plants she was watering. "I can't stay long." "I know." She finally turned to him, and he saw she was crying. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. Proud of the man you've become, even if I don't understand all of it. You took something terrible, that robbery, that humiliation, and turned it into something that helped thousands of people. It started with your letter, your courage to speak up when the system told you to stay silent. It started before that, It started with your father teaching us that fear was just opportunity in disguise. It started with Patricia showing us that fighting even when you lose is better than not fighting at all. It started with you becoming something dangerous enough to challenge the darkness. They stood together in the garden, surrounded by growth where there had been decay, hope where there had been despair. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and Marcus thought about how appropriate that was, light and darkness existing together, neither complete without the other. "There's something else," Evelyn said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out an envelope, aged and yellow. "Your father wrote this before he deployed for the last time, told me to give it to you when you were ready. I think you're ready now." Marcus opened it with hands that had been steady through gunfights, but trembled now. His father's handwriting faded, but legible. "Son, if you're reading this, it means I didn't come home and your mother thinks you're ready for truth. The work I did, the work I suspect you'll do, requires us to become weapons. But never forget that weapons are tools, and tools serve purposes, and the purpose must always be protection of those who cannot protect themselves. I've done things that would horrify you. Killed men who needed killing, destroyed lives that threatened innocent ones. But I never lost sight of why, so that you and your mother and your sister could live in a world with less darkness. If you follow this path, and knowing our blood, you will remember the darkness we carry is not who we are. It's what we bear, so others don't have to. We are not the shadow. We are what stands between the shadow and the light. Love your mother for both of us. She's stronger than either of us ever were." Dad Marcus folded the letter carefully, placed it in the pocket over his heart, where his mother's letter had lived for months. "He knew," Marcus said. "He knew what I'd become. He became it first. Different war, same enemy, those who prey on the innocent." Evelyn touched his face gently. "You're so much like him, but also like me. You got his skills, but my stubbornness. His training, but my sense of justice. What you did, Mom, standing up to Lasker, writing that letter that took more courage than anything I've ever done. No, baby. What took courage was you walking away from everything you knew to answer that letter. You could have stayed in your shadows, stayed safe, but you came when I called." A car appeared at the end of the street, unmarked but obviously official. His ride to whatever came next. "I have to go." "I know." She hugged him then, fierce and strong despite her age. "Don't be a stranger, but don't be too familiar either." "You said that before." It bears repeating. The world needs Marcus Carter to stay hidden, so Echo One can do what needs doing. But your mother needs to know her son is alive even if she can't see him. He walked to the car, turned back once to see her standing in her garden surrounded by vegetables and flowers, and the community that had rallied around her. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd changed the world with $600 worth of injustice and a letter to her son. The car pulled away, taking Marcus toward whatever darkness needed confronting next. But he carried light with him now, his mother's courage, his father's purpose, the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of standing up could trigger the largest changes. Behind him, Millhaven continued its transformation. Detective Chen had transferred there, taking over as chief, implementing reforms that would become a model for departments nationwide. The corner where Lasker had robbed Evelyn became a memorial, not to the crime, but to the courage of standing up against it. A simple plaque that read, "On this spot, justice began with one voice refusing to be silenced." Victor Kedroff was convicted on 47 federal charges. At his sentencing, he made one statement: "I was destroyed by an old woman and her son." In Russia, this would be comedy. In America, apparently, it's justice. The judge, one of the clean ones who'd replaced the corrupted, responded, "In America, Mr. Kedroff, it's both." As the weeks turned to months, the story became legend, the way true stories do, when they touch something fundamental in people's hearts. An elderly black woman robbed by a racist cop. A son emerging from shadows to deliver justice. A community standing together against corruption. A system broken for so long finally beginning to repair itself. But Evelyn Carter, tending her garden, watching children play where dealers once stood, knew the real truth. It wasn't about legends or stories or even justice, really. It was about love. The love of a son for his mother. The love of a community for its vulnerable. The love that says some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. She thought about Marcus, wherever he was, doing whatever darkness demanded of him. She worried the way mothers always worry. But she also knew he was exactly where he needed to be, in the space between light and shadow, keeping the monsters at bay. The phone in her apartment rang a number she didn't recognize from a country she couldn't pronounce. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The fact that it rang at all was message enough. I'm alive. I'm fighting. I remember. She went back to her plants, watering them in the evening light, humming an old hymn about justice, rolling down like water. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new corruptions, to face, new battles to fight. But tonight, in this moment, she allowed herself to feel what she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Not because the world had suddenly become less dangerous, but because she knew there were people like her son standing guard in the darkness. People like Detective Chen standing guard in the light, and people like her community standing guard for each other. The $600 that had been stolen from her had been returned tenfold in the settlement. She'd donated most of it to a fund for other victims of police corruption. The rest she'd used to expand the garden to plant fruit trees that would feed the neighborhood for generations. As the stars came out over Millhaven, Evelyn Carter looked up at them and whispered a prayer, not for justice this time, but for gratitude. For a son who'd answered her call. For a community that had stood with her. For the proof that sometimes, against all odds, the light wins. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, she imagined Marcus heard her. Somewhere in that same darkness, he did. 2 years passed before Marcus saw his mother again, though he'd watched her from a distance more times than she knew. Each visit to Millhaven was a risk, but some risks were worth taking. This time he came because of news that changed everything. Evelyn Carter had been diagnosed with cancer. He found her in the same hospital where Victor had tried to use her as leverage, in the same wing where his sister had died. But this time, the room was full of flowers, cards, visitors coming and going. She'd become something of a local celebrity, the woman whose courage had sparked a national reckoning. "I knew you'd come," she said when he entered, not even looking up from the book she was reading. "Mothers always know." Marcus sat beside her bed, taking in the changes 2 years had wrought. She was thinner, frailer, but her eyes still held that fierce intelligence that had seen through every lie he'd ever tried to tell her. "The doctors say 6 months, she said simply. "Maybe a year if I do the treatment. But I'm tired, baby. 78 years of fighting is enough. Mom, don't." She reached out, took his hand. "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing my terms. The same way you choose yours every day in whatever darkness you inhabit now." He wanted to argue, to rage against the unfairness of it all. He'd dismantled criminal empires, toppled corrupt institutions, but he couldn't fight the cancer eating away at his mother's body. "There's something else," she said. "Tom Brennan came to see me yesterday." Marcus tensed. Lasker's former partner had stayed clean since testifying, but old habits died hard in law enforcement. He wanted to apologize, not for what he did to me, he'd already done that, but for what he never did. All those years of watching Lasker hurt people, staying silent, being complicit. She squeezed Marcus's hand. "He told me something interesting. The night before Lasker robbed me, Brennan had finally decided to report him. Had the paperwork filled out, evidence gathered. But he lost his nerve. Threw it all away. Why tell you this now? Because he wanted me to know that my speaking up did what he couldn't. That my letter to you accomplished what his conscience had failed to do for years." She smiled sadly. "We all have our moments of choosing between silence and speech. I'm glad I chose to speak when I did." A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Raymond Chen entered, looking older but more confident than when Marcus had first saved him from Victor's frame job. "Mrs. Carter," Chen said, then noticed Marcus. His hand moved instinctively toward his weapon before stopping. "You're him. The one who saved me. The voice on the phone." Marcus said nothing, but Evelyn laughed. "Relax, detective. My son isn't here to cause trouble. Are you Marcus?" Chen's eyes widened. "Marcus Carter. Echo 1. We've been looking for you for 2 years." "No," Marcus said quietly. "You've been looking for Michael Volkov. Marcus Carter died in a car accident in Prague 6 months ago. Check the records." "But you're sitting right here." "Am I, or are you visiting Mrs. Carter alone offering condolences about her son's tragic death overseas?" Chen looked between them, understanding dawning. "The agency cleaned your records. New identity." "New identities," Marcus corrected. "Plural. But that's not why you're here." Chen pulled out a folder thick with documents. "No, I'm here because of this. Mrs. Carter, we've been tracking something, a new network rising from Volkov's ashes. Smarter, more careful, but just as corrupt. They call themselves the Syndicate." "Creative name," Marcus said dryly. "They're targeting families of officers who testified against the old network. 3 killed so far, all made to look like accidents. Mrs. Carter, we have credible intelligence that you're next on their list." Evelyn laughed, surprising both men. "Of course I am. It would be disappointing if I wasn't. Detective, do you know what my husband used to say about death?" "No, ma'am." "That it's just another door. We spend so much time fearing it that we forget to live before we walk through it. These syndicate people want to kill me. Let them come. They'll find an old woman with cancer who's already made her peace." "Mom, this is serious. Everything's serious with you, baby. That's your burden. But I'm done being afraid. I've got 6 months to a year left. You think I'm going to spend it hiding?" Chen looked uncomfortable. "We can offer protection. You can offer to let me live my life." Evelyn interrupted. "Whatever time I have left, I want to spend it in my garden with my community, watching the changes we fought for take root. If someone wants to end that early, that's their choice. But hiding isn't mine." Marcus stood abruptly. "Show me the files." Chen hesitated, then handed them over. Marcus scanned them with the speed of someone trained to process intelligence quickly. Names, dates, patterns emerging from the data like a picture from static. "This isn't random," he said finally. "It's specific. They're not just targeting families, they're targeting symbols, people whose stories inspired others to speak up. They're trying to create fear retroactively, make people regret choosing justice." "Can you stop them?" Marcus looked at his mother dying of cancer, but still unafraid, then at Chen representing the system trying to reform itself. "Not as Marcus Carter," he said. "He's dead, remember, but someone else might be able to help." That night, while Evelyn slept, Marcus made calls from the hospital's roof. Not to his old handlers, those bridges were burned, but to the network he'd built in the shadows since leaving the agency. Former operatives who'd grown tired of serving corrupted interests. Hackers who'd rather expose crime than commit it. Cops like Chen who'd chosen integrity over easy money. "I need a favor," he said to each of them. "My mother is dying. There are people who want to speed that up. I need them stopped." By dawn, he had what he needed. The syndicate thought they were hidden, but Marcus had learned from the best and become better. Within 72 hours, he had their entire organizational structure mapped, their finances, tracked, their plans exposed. But instead of dismantling them himself, he did something else. He gave everything to the communities they'd targeted. Mrs. Washington, whose grandson had been beaten by police, received files showing the syndicate's plans for her family. Mr. Rodriguez found evidence of who was really behind his son's false arrest. The Turner family discovered which judges had been bought to ensure their daughter's killer walked free. Armed with information, the communities did what communities do: they organized. Not for violence, but for visibility. They held vigils outside syndicate members' homes. They filed lawsuits with evidence that couldn't be ignored. They spoke to media with proof that couldn't be disputed. Within a month, the syndicate was collapsing. Not from external force, but from internal pressure. Members turned on each other trying to save themselves. The smart ones fled. The stupid ones were arrested. The dangerous ones found themselves facing the kind of justice that operated outside courtrooms. Marcus watched it all from a distance from the shadows he'd made his home. But he came back to Millhaven for what he knew would be his last real visit with his mother. She was in her garden when he found her weaker but still tending her plants. The community had taken over most of the work, but she insisted on watering the tomatoes herself. "They're gone," he said simply. "The syndicate. They won't threaten you or anyone else." "I know," she said. "Mrs. Washington told me. Showed me the files that mysteriously appeared on her doorstep. Very thorough work. Almost like someone with specialized training was involved." "Must have been a concerned citizen." She smiled that knowing smile that had seen through every childhood lie. "Must have been." They sat together in the evening light, watching children play in the space that had once been a wasteland. The garden had expanded again now, covering the entire vacant lot. Fruit trees were beginning to bloom. Vegetables grew in neat rows. Flowers attracted bees and butterflies, bringing life to a place that had known too much death. "I want to tell you something," Evelyn said. "About the day your father died." Marcus had heard the story before helicopter crash in Afghanistan, mechanical failure, no survivors. But something in her voice said this was different. "He called me the night before. Wasn't supposed to, but he did. Said he'd discovered something, evidence of weapons being sold to enemies, American soldiers dying from American bullets. He was going to report it." "Mom, the helicopter crash wasn't mechanical failure, Marcus. Your father was killed for trying to expose corruption. Just like you've been fighting it. Just like I fought it in my small way." Marcus felt something shift inside him, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed suddenly fitting together. "I never told you, because I wanted you to choose your own path. But you chose the same one anyway. The same fight, just different battlegrounds." Did he know that they were coming for him? Yes. But he got on that helicopter anyway, because that's what Carters do. We stand up even when we know the cost. She reached into her pocket, pulled out another envelope. Older than the first, more worn. He wrote this too. For you. For when you knew the truth. Marcus opened it with hands that had steadied through war but shook now. Marcus. If you're reading this, your mother has told you the truth. I'm going to die tomorrow. I know it, feel it in my bones, the way soldiers learn to feel ambushes coming. I could run, disappear. Your mother would understand and we could start over somewhere else. But then the corruption continues. More soldiers die. More families grieve. I'm choosing to get on that helicopter because my death will mean something. It will trigger investigations, raise questions, maybe save lives. It's not the death I would choose, but it's the one that matters. You'll grow up without me, and that breaks my heart. But you'll grow up with your mother, and that gives me peace. She's the strongest person I know. Listen to her. Learn from her. Become the man she'll need you to be. The world is full of darkness, son. Don't add to it. Be the light that pushes it back, even if that light can only be seen by those who need it most. I love you more than words can say. Live well. Fight hard. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. And remember, we are not the shadow. We are what stands between the shadow and the light." Dad Marcus read it twice, 3 times, memorizing words that connected him to a father he'd barely known, but whose path he'd followed anyway. "He knew," Marcus said. "He knew what he was doing. Just like you knew when you answered my letter. Just like I knew when I sent it." Evelyn took his hand. "We're a family of people who speak up when silence would be safer. It's our blessing and our curse. It killed him. It's killing you. No, baby. Cancer is killing me. Speaking up is what let me live. Really live, not just exist. These last 2 years, seeing the changes, watching the community transform, knowing that 600 stolen dollars started something that changed the world that's living. She stood slowly, painfully, but with dignity intact. I need you to promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, don't come to the funeral. Mom. Listen. Marcus Carter is already dead officially. Let him stay dead. Whatever identity you're wearing now, whatever shadow work you're doing, that matters more than one day of mourning. You're my mother. And you're my son. Which means you're stubborn enough to ignore me, but smart enough to know I'm right. She touched his face gently. Mourn me in your way from your shadows. But keep fighting. Keep standing between the darkness and the light. That's how you honor me, not with flowers at a funeral, but with justice for those who need it. He wanted to argue, but she was right. She was always right. There's one more thing, she said, leading him to a corner of the garden he hadn't noticed. A small stone marker, no name, just dates. For Patricia. And next to it, another stone also unnamed. For your father. And there, a third stone newer. For you. Mom. The world thinks Marcus Carter is dead. Let them mourn him here. Let them remember the boy who became something else to protect others. She smiled through tears. But you and I know the truth. He's not dead. He just learned to live in the spaces most people can't see. They stood together in the garden cemetery, 3 stones for 3 family members the world thought it had lost. But only 2 were really gone. The third had become something else, a ghost of justice, a shadow with purpose, a son who'd answered his mother's call and changed everything. I should stay, Marcus said, for whatever time you have left. No, you should go. Do what you do. Be who you are. She hugged him, then fierce despite her frailty. But know this, every life you save, every corrupt official you expose, every bit of justice you deliver in the dark, I'll know. Mothers always know. He left that night disappearing into shadows, as he'd been trained to do. But he left something behind, a phone untraceable but reliable. For emergencies, for last words, for the goodbye, they both knew was coming. 3 months later, it rang. Marcus! Evelyn's voice was weak but clear. It's time. He was in Budapest tracking an arms dealer who sold to terrorists. The mission was critical, time-sensitive, the kind that didn't allow for personal delays. But he dropped everything, used extraction protocols meant for emergencies, and was in Millhaven within 18 hours. She was in the hospital again, but this time the room was quiet. Just her and Pastor Williams, who stood when Marcus entered. I'll give you privacy, the pastor said. Stay, Evelyn whispered. Someone should witness this. Marcus sat beside her, took her hand. It felt like holding autumn leaves, fragile, ready to crumble. I'm proud of you, she said. So proud. You became everything your father and I hoped, not what we expected, but what the world needed. Because of you, your courage, your strength. My stubbornness, she corrected with a weak smile. Too stubborn to stay quiet when they said I should. Too stubborn to die before seeing justice done. And now too stubborn to leave without saying goodbye properly. Her breathing was labored, each word an effort. But her eyes remained clear-focused, full of the love that had sustained him through darkness he couldn't describe. The garden, she said. Take care of it. Not yourself, you have other work. But make sure someone does. It's not just plants. It's proof that beautiful things can grow from broken ground. I promise. And Marcus, forgive. Not them, not Lasker, or Victor, or any of the others. They chose their path. But forgive yourself. For the violence you've had to do. For the life you couldn't live. For the man you had to become. Mom. Promise me. I promise. She smiled, then peaceful in a way he'd never seen. Your father is waiting. Patricia too. They've been patient, but I think they're ready for me to come home. You are home. No, baby. This was just a stop. Home is where love lives forever, where justice doesn't need fighting for because it simply is. I'm going home. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, Marcus thought she was gone. But they opened once more, fierce and bright. Tell them, she whispered. Tell them Evelyn Carter wasn't afraid. Not at the beginning, not at the end. Tell them I stood up. I will. Good. Now let me go, baby. Let me go home. Her hand relaxed in his. Her breathing slowed, then stopped. The monitors sang their electronic dirge, but Marcus didn't hear them. He heard only the echo of her last words, the sound of a woman who'd changed the world by refusing to be silent. Pastor Williams prayed, but Marcus didn't bow his head. He stared at his mother's face, peaceful now, free from pain and struggle and the weight of fighting systems designed to crush her. She was remarkable, the pastor said finally. She was everything, Marcus replied. He stayed until they came for her body, then disappeared before the questions could start. But he kept his promise. He made sure the story was told. Not by him, but through the network he'd built. The story of Evelyn Carter's last words spread through Millhaven, then beyond. The woman who'd stood up to corruption, even as cancer ate away at her. The mother whose courage had sparked a revolution. The garden tender who'd proved beautiful things could grow from broken ground. The funeral was enormous. Hundreds came, the community she'd fought for, the officials who'd been inspired by her, the journalists who'd told her story. The garden was transformed into a memorial, flowers everywhere, the fruit trees she'd planted heavy with produce that would feed the neighborhood. Marcus watched from a distance from a building where he'd set up surveillance. He saw Tom Brennan speak, tears streaming down his face as he talked about redemption and courage. He saw Detective Chen describe how one woman's letter had started the largest anti-corruption operation in American history. He saw Mrs. Washington and Mr. Rodriguez and the Turner family, and dozens of others, share how Evelyn Carter had shown them that standing up was possible, even when the system said to sit down. But the moment that broke him was when a child, maybe 6 years old, stood up and said simply, "Mrs. Carter taught me to grow tomatoes. She said if you water them and don't give up, they'll feed you. I won't give up." Marcus allowed himself one moment of grief, one moment of being a son who'd lost his mother, rather than an operative who'd lost an asset. Then he packaged the grief away, locked it with all the other things that would destroy him if he let them out. That night, he visited the garden alone. The 3 stones stood in moonlight, his father, his sister, himself. Now a 4th stone would join them, completing the family cemetery. But like his stone, it would mark an ending that was really a transformation. He knelt by where she'd tended her tomatoes, felt the soil she'd worked with her hands. Rich now, fertile, nothing like the broken ground it had been. That was her true memorial transformation of the broken into something that could sustain life. His phone buzzed. A secure message from someone he hadn't heard from in years. Director Sarah Chen. Your mother's death hasn't gone unnoticed. The president wants to posthumously award her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Will you accept on her behalf? Marcus almost laughed. His mother, who'd been robbed by a cop for $600, being honored by the highest office in the land. The poetry of it would have amused her. No, he typed back. Give it to the community. Create a fund in her name. Let it grow things the way she did. There was a long pause before the response came. Understood. And Marcus, your country owes her a debt it can never repay. It owes her justice. Keep paying that debt and we're square. He deleted the conversation, destroyed the phone, became shadow again. There was work to do. Corruption to expose innocence, to protect justice, to deliver from darkness. The work his father had died trying to do. The work his mother had started with a simple letter. The work that never ended but mattered anyway. As he left Millhaven for what he knew would be the last time, Marcus stopped at the spot where it had all begun. Birch Avenue, where Officer Brent Lasker had robbed an elderly woman and set in motion events that would reshape American justice. There was a plaque there now, the one he'd seen before, but with new words added, In memory of Evelyn Carter, 1947-2025, she stood up. Simple words, but they contained everything. A life reduced to its essential truth, she stood up when sitting down would have been safer. She spoke when silence would have been easier. She fought when surrender would have been understandable. Marcus touched the plaque once, a son saying goodbye to his mother, a shadow acknowledging the light that had created it. Then he walked into the darkness that was his home, now carrying her memory like armor, her courage like a weapon, her love like the only light he'd ever need. Somewhere in that darkness, corruption still festered. Somewhere, innocent people were being crushed by systems designed to protect them. Somewhere, another Evelyn Carter was being robbed, humiliated, told their voice didn't matter. But Marcus Carter was out there too. Not the boy who'd grown up in Millhaven, not the man who'd answered his mother's letter. That person was dead, buried in a garden with tomatoes and memories. What remained was something else. Something forged in shadow, but aimed at light. Something dangerous to those who preyed on the vulnerable. Echo 1. The ghost in the machine. The justice that came from nowhere and disappeared into nothing. His mother had stood up with dignity and demanded justice for $600. Her son would stand in shadow and deliver it one corruption at a time until the world was worthy of the woman who'd refused to be silent. The war that had started with petty theft would continue in darkness, fought by a man who no longer existed, driven by love that would never die. And somewhere in whatever came after this life, Evelyn Carter would know her son was still fighting, still standing between the shadow and the light, still watering the seeds of justice she'd planted with her courage. The story that had begun with robbery ended with revolution. But the fight would continue as long as darkness threatened light, as long as corruption threatened justice, as long as there were those who would stand up, speak out, and refuse to be silenced. Just as Evelyn Carter had taught them. Just as she'd taught him.